Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and today's episode 7 of my video series. Today, we're going to do something different, which is instead of talking about Iskandar Malaysia, we're going to talk about Singapore. And the reason being is because I think many of you who are on my channel, my subscribers, thank you. Our subscription rate on my YouTube has been going up very well. And ever since I started doing videos in January, I think we saw a lot of pickup in interest from people who want to learn more through me. And thank you very much. All your views and your comments are much appreciated. So today we're going to talk about Singapore because Singapore property market is quite hot right now. And I think lots of people are interested to buy in Singapore, whether you are Malaysian or Singaporean. It doesn't matter whether you live in Malaysia or in Singapore. I always get this question, how to buy property in Singapore. Even when I'm in KL, people in KL also ask me this question quite a lot because no one really teaches how to buy Singapore in KL. So today I'm going to do that. We're going to do this in 2 videos. So episode 7 part 1 and episode 7 part 2. Sorry, episode 8 part 2. Okay, so and this video is going to be about half an hour, 45 minutes, and we're going to try and cover some basics first. It's not about where to buy in Singapore or what to buy in Singapore, just a basic level video about how to go about buying property in Singapore, so that will get you started. Okay, so a bit of introduction about myself. Let me play this video. My name is Ryan Khoo, and I'm a Malaysian. I'm a Singapore PR, and I've been in Singapore since 2009, and a private property investor since 2007. I'm most known for promoting Iskandar Malaysia because those days Iskandar Malaysia was a very big thing, and we try to help a lot of people in Singapore and Malaysia merge this together, where a lot of interest was in Iskandar Malaysia. And I'm a property agent of ERA, both in Singapore and in Malaysia. And you have seen me done a lot of talks about property investment, property buying through Property Guru, iProperty, ST Property, The Edge, right? I've been invited to a lot of forums to talk about real estate, and I used to contribute articles to The Edge Singapore, right? And today I'm residing in both Singapore and Malaysia. Of course, now with COVID, I have been in Johor Bahru for much of the past year and this year. And yeah, so that's a bit of my background. I transacted I think all in over quarter billion ringgit worth of properties in both Singapore and Malaysia. And yeah, so I feel fairly qualified. I've bought and sold properties, my own and those for my owners in Singapore, Malaysia, US. Yeah, but I'm most qualified to speak about Malaysia and Singapore. And today I shall do so. Okay, so today is you want to buy property in Singapore? Who's the audience? We're going to cover who are the type of people who want to buy property in Singapore, why they buy property in Singapore, different types of property to buy in Singapore, what are HDBs, what are private residential properties, and actually specifically we're going to talk about condos and pros and cons. Okay, so the reason why you're watching this video is most likely you are a first-time property buyer to Singapore. Means you have not bought anything in Singapore before. You want to buy, and these are generally first-time Singapore buyers. You could be just entered the workforce. You could be a Malaysian who in Singapore now working. You've been in Singapore for a few years, and you think, hey, Singapore's a pretty nice place. I want to buy something in Singapore. How does that work, right? And you could also be a foreigner who is interested to invest in Singapore property, because Singapore is very well known to be a very major global gateway city, and that attracts a lot of people to buy in Singapore. And Singapore is very well known for the stability of the country, the strong politics, and very interesting property market. Okay, so if you're any one of those categories, this video is for you. Okay, so why is Singapore such a popular place to buy property, right? And this is a chart that's as of a quarter 1 this year, 2021, and you can see this is how Singapore property prices have moved. And if you look at most recently, that means the final quarter or 2 quarters of the most recent quarter, actually Singapore property prices have gone up during the COVID pandemic. That means everybody is stuck in Singapore. The economy is the global economy, not just Singapore, but the global economy is in trouble. But we are grappling with the health crisis, where millions are dying and millions more are infected. But despite all this, the Singapore property market is still doing very well. And I think last quarter, the flash estimate was about a 3% jump in private property prices, and why, and why is that happening? So number one, Singapore is a fairly friendly country to the rich. So it's well known. We sometimes call Singapore the Switzerland of the East because many high net worth individuals park their money in Singapore, right? And the banks in Singapore, the financial sector in Singapore does very well, especially those who do private banking. Rich money park in Singapore. Lots of high net worth individuals have made Singapore their home. I mean, the famous ones include Facebook co-founder Eduardo Svarin, and recently is Dyson, James Dyson from the UK, right? He came to Singapore, set up residency here, and did some business here. But of course, there's the news that he has also just went back to UK. Lots of other people from China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan have also chosen Singapore as their home, as their residency, bought property here, right, and parked their money here, right? And if you look at top billionaire cities in the world, Singapore is the only one from Southeast Asia in this list, right? And very competitive. Even though Southeast Asia is a smaller place, you can see Singapore is right up there with cities from bigger, richer countries such as Beijing, London, Moscow. I mean, they're not very far off, right? And highly competitive in terms of the number of high net worth individuals who live in Singapore. And all that money, of course, trickles down into the economy, trickle down into real estate, right? And Singapore has also a very, very high GDP per capita, right? GDP per capita is a good indicator of how rich a country is, or on average, how rich the citizens or residents of the country is. And you can see that Singapore, based on 2019 data, is actually richer than Japan, richer than Hong Kong. So the general Singaporean is a rich person. Of course, I know they are not every Singaporean is rich, right? But generally, as Singapore is a first world country, is a leader among first world countries, right, in terms of wealth, right? And this, of course, translates into real estate and other parts of the economy. Okay, so one interesting piece of news that happened during the COVID-19 pandemic is actually which also explains why property prices in Singapore went up, is because this news is about golf club membership in Singapore, right? Which is at the Sentosa Golf Club, and membership prices actually went up to 260,000 US dollars. Now, why? So basically, if you ask me, a lot of people are stuck at home during COVID. They cannot go out, cannot travel. Even businessmen can't travel to do business. So they are spending a lot more time at home. And in Singapore, this includes all the rich people, because no one can travel, including high net worth people, right? So they are stuck at home and they are doing things like play golf and, of course, buy property. So this is why golf club membership go up. This is also why property prices go up, because basically the rich people and the high net worth people, and of course any mass affluent category people in Singapore, they have nothing else, nowhere else to spend the money on. And I give you a practical example. A property agent has easier to find time to make appointment with such clients, because they can't really go anywhere. They're all at home anyway. So to do or in Singapore anyway, to look at property, and this of course will translate into better property transaction results, right? So this is one reason, if you ask me, why Singapore property market has done pretty well during the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, the other reason is because the Singapore government has done a very, very good job, especially in the second half of last year, 2020, to control the pandemic. And cases in Singapore are way, way lower than many, many other countries in the world, much lower than Malaysia, definitely. And I mean, they are like single digit, double digit cases daily, which is amazing achievement. And this has resulted in a fairly relaxed environment in Singapore, where the business is going as per usual, and a lot of sectors of the economy are doing better than before. So plus this, of course, yeah, property market is doing well. So the other thing is, of course, why we cover this is because there are a lot of Malaysians who have been working in Singapore since for a long, long time. Of course, Malaysia and Singapore are formerly the same country. World Bank says there's more than 1 million Malaysians in Singapore right now. And if you think about it, Singapore has about 5.65 million, 5.5 million resident population. So at least 20% or more are Malaysians in Singapore. So every 5 person you see in the streets in Singapore, actually one is actually a Malaysian, and actually the actual figure is probably higher, right? And So, and of course, all these Malaysians living in Singapore, there's after some time, of course, generally there's an interest to buy property in Singapore. So what can you buy? Okay, and so generally the first property that everyone is familiar with is called the HDB flat. So this is the Housing Development Board. HDB is short for Housing Development Board, and HDB is basically a government agency, and this is actually government housing. To make it simple to understand, it's government housing built by the government, right? And there are some rules with it. So all HDB flats are 99-year leasehold. If you go to Singapore, HDB is a permanent landscape of Singapore. You see it everywhere, right? If you first time go to Singapore, you know what I mean, right? HDB flats are everywhere. If you see an MRT train, you look outside the window, you will definitely see lots of HDB flats, because HDB flats are the most common type of residential property in Singapore, and very distinctive because many of them, especially the older ones, have a very similar design, right? And as I mentioned here, there's old HDBs built in the 60s to newer HDBs which are very modern with very modern specs. So it actually depends. When you say you buy HDB, generally people want to know you're buying an old one or new one, right? And where, but you can buy HDB in mature estates, right? Places like Ang Mo Kio, Bedok, Bishan, these are considered Clementi, these are mature areas. Or you can buy in non-mature areas like Punggol, Tengah, Bidadari. All these are the newer areas where they are less amenities, but of course they are cheaper, right? And although they're cheaper, they tend to be newer and the newer designs. Small units to big units, HDB have anything from one room to the jumbo size units, which are pretty big. Okay, so the thing about HDB is that they're highly regulated. The government has a lot of rules about HDB. We'll talk about it later, right? But this is at least the most affordable type of residential property in Singapore. Most affordable, right? The cheapest residential property you can find. If you're buying a house in Singapore just for purposes of living, not for investment or speculation, I mean, HDB is the best choice, the most obvious choice. Okay, so the next category, of course, is a condo, right? And when we say condo, we're talking about private residential property. That means so private residential property, and here I put bracket condo. So a condo is like any condo anywhere else in the world, high-rise condo, where normally comes with facilities like swimming pool, gym, function halls. Nowadays the newer ones even have karaoke room and very fancy type of pools and gardens and stuff, right? And private residential property, they have less regulation compared to HDB, right? I won't say regulation free, but generally this is the most free, most free type of property, residential property in Singapore, right? Less regulations, right? There's another version called the EC, right? Executive condominium, which is a hybrid version of the HDB and the condo. EC basically is somewhere in the middle where it converts. It starts off as HDB, but after 10 years, it turns into a condo, right? Yeah, there's such thing. Okay, right? Some of you may have heard this the first time. So, wow, got such thing. Yes, Singapore got such thing. Where EC, right, the executive condominium, it starts off its first 10 years of the life as a HDB. After 10 years, it converts into a private condominium, right? Okay. So the next is landed houses. So now landed houses, like Malaysia, it's the same, right? It's a landed house, a terrace house, a bungalow, semi-D. The definitions are the same, right? In Singapore, you have it 2-story or 3-story. 3 stories are more common in Singapore. I mean, if you live in Singapore long enough, you will notice that actually 3-story house is more common than in Malaysia. I mean, Malaysia you have, but you don't normally see 3-story house so often. But in Singapore, it's quite common, right? And plots are typically narrower in Singapore. In Singapore, right? 20 feet is very common, right? In Malaysia, you have 24, 26, 30 for terrace houses, but in Singapore, normally the plot is not so wide. It may be long, but it's not so wide. And landed property can only be owned by Singaporean. Okay, I repeat. Landed property with individual title can only be owned by Singaporeans. If you are a foreigner and you want to buy, you need to seek approval from SLA, the Singapore Land Authority. It's quite difficult to get unless for some reason SLA thinks that you are some special person, then you may get it. But landed property can only be owned by Singaporeans, or if you have SLA permission. There are exemptions. The first exemption is at Sentosa, the island of Sentosa, where Resort World is, the casino, and the integrated resort is. Sentosa is allowed for foreign purchase. Sentosa is special in that sense. And of course, if you buy what we call those strata landed in the condominium project. It means the condominium project itself has some strata landed. Those strata landed also eligible because they are basically a condo, although they are built like a landed. We call strata landed like a condo. Those also foreigner can buy, right? But a typical individual title landed property can only be owned by Singaporean. Okay, so yeah, and all landed properties in Singapore are generally expensive, right? Because land in Singapore is scarce. Singapore is a small island, so any landed property has a high value. And so in terms of we call atasness, right? What is the most cheap top property is a HDB, HDB then condo, then landed. Then above landed, right, there's another category of landed which is called good class bungalow, where they have basically it's a super bungalow, right, with a minimum land size, and they have certain regulations also in terms of how to build a GCB. Now, GCBs are very rare. They're only located in certain locations in Singapore. There's a fixed number of GCBs. These are normally trophy assets bought by the super rich, owned by the multimillionaires and the billionaires. They will buy a JCB. And although trophy assets, but they have actually shown very strong price appreciation over the years, right? And yeah, because they're very limited number, and also a very what do you call high class kind of property, right? So the next thing you can buy, of course, is a shop house. Shop house is like in Malaysia or any other country, shop house is a commercial title. In Singapore, some of them are called conservation status because of the location they're in, like those you see in Tanjong Pagar or in some parts of East Coast Singapore. These are conservation shop house status where you cannot simply modify the facade. Very limited supply, and due to the value and the strong value value protection, it means these properties are very stable in prices, right? So they are investment grade properties. Lots of funds and big investors also buy such shop houses, and as investable properties by big funds and big companies, right? And but yeah, they are like any typical other shop house in Malaysia or any other country, right? So the next thing is industrial property. Now, industrial Singapore property, normally you categorize it as B1 or B2. B1 is basically light. So B2 is heavy, right? So B1 is a light factory, and you may see, wow, why factory like that one, like multiple story, like just like an office. But Singapore is like that. Due to scarcity of land, B1 factories are normally multi-story kind of factories, right? And there's a ramp where the lorries can drive up to the higher floors. But they are actually for light usage, right? And normally the government also has this rule where 60% is for pure industrial use and 40% for ancillary. So when we say ancillary, means office, and within the factory, but a lot of factories have office, right? So have factory 40% for office use allowed within this industrial B1. So in many cases, sometimes when you say you're buying a B1, typically the building allows up to 40% use for offices, right? So that's why you see the photo, although it's called a B1 industrial, but it looks in a way like an office. So, and many people treat it like a cheaper office. There's a bit of a gray area here that has been discussed in the industry for some time, how this thing is being abused or not. But actually, it's a fairly popular method to buy B1 property for rental income, right? We won't talk so much about it here today, but yeah, basically that's what a B1 industrial property is, right? Okay, so there are many other things. I won't cover all today, right? There are HDB shops, HDB landed. Yeah, there's such a thing. HDB Housing Development Board also got landed property, but they don't build it anymore, right? This is just a small segment. Strata offices. So strata offices are real, proper office category, office title offices, retail, strata retail, and of course the B2 heavy factories. But we won't cover all this today, and I think most of you will not be looking at these kind of categories. Okay, so the first thing I'm talk about is a HDB flat. Now, you say, Ryan, I want to buy HDB. HDB is the cheapest. Or I saw online HDB selling for this price. Is it a good buy? Can I buy a HDB flat? So how do you buy HDB flat? There are generally three ways. Number one, you buy a new launch HDB. That means called a BTO. Normally it's called a BTO, build to order, from the government, from the HDB. HDB will launch a new HDB and BTO, and there'll be a construction period, say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then upon completion you get the keys. So that's called a BTO. So you buy off plan. Second is you buy a balanced completed HDB. It means it was already built earlier, but not sold yet from the HDB. So you buy this HDB from the government because it's one thing, you can get keys and move in immediately. And the third is to buy a resale from the market. That means someone owns a HDB today and you buy a second hand from them, right? So these are the three general ways to buy HDB, right? And there are a few rules to start off with. Rule number one, you cannot own any private property before you buy the HDB and anywhere. So if you have a private property, if you have a condo in Singapore, you cannot buy HDB. You must get rid of the condo first. If you have a condo in Malaysia, for example, you have your parents gave you a house inherited, or you inherited a house from your parents in Malaysia, a landed house. Actually, by law, you cannot buy HDB in Singapore also. Okay, I repeat, if you own any private property anywhere, you cannot buy HDB. HDB must be your first house ever, first residential property ever anywhere in the world. Okay, so as a Malaysian, this may be a problem because you may, like I said, you may own property already in Malaysia, then actually you cannot buy HDB. Okay, so actually when you buy a HDB, the HDB has a declaration form where you have to declare all these things. I do not own a property anywhere, and you have to declare. If you declare, if you do a false declaration and you get caught, then of course the government can punish you, right? So by law is you cannot own any private property anywhere. Private residential property, shop can, office can, but you cannot own any private residential property anywhere before you buy a HDB in Singapore, right? Because HDB is meant for first-time home buyers. Okay, you cannot own a HDB also, right? If you own one HDB today, you cannot buy a second HDB. You must sell the first HDB. Normally, they give you 6 months to sell it, right, before you buy the second one. But you cannot own 2 HDBs concurrently. You must own one. Of course, this is a fairly recent rule. I mean, recent in the history of Singapore. If you go back 30, 40 years ago, there are people who own multiple HDBs, but that was in the old days when all these rules were not tightened. But today, if you want to buy HDB, you cannot own another HDB prior. Okay, so, and of course, this presentation, we're not going to cover lots of categories. They have many other categories, HDB, to help certain categories of people, for example, orphans and single mothers, etc., all these things. But I will not cover, and they have a rental scheme also, but I will not talk about that because that's very complicated. Okay, so these are the first few things to understand. Okay, cannot own any private property anywhere, private residential property anywhere, and cannot own a HDB before you buy this HDB. Okay, next. The other requirement is to want to buy HDB is there are these four eligibility points here. Is number one, what we call the fiancé scheme. That means you must get married, right, within 3 months of getting the keys. Okay, so if you buy a BTO from the government, right, and the BTO completion is 4 years. Okay, so normally you and the person buying, you must be fiancé, right? And you wait 4 years. Upon 4 years, the HDB is ready. You must get married or be married. You can marry earlier, of course. Within 3 months of getting keys, the government actually wants to see your marriage certificate. So you can see at the bottom here, I put this was something in the Age Prop Singapore put last time, right? Should couples apply for BTO before marriage proposal or after, right? So you can see it's a pretty funny poll, right? So in Singapore, you want to buy a house, you must get married, right? If you have a girlfriend, you want to marry your girlfriend, we have this joke that you must propose with a BTO, right? Some people call it unromantic, some people call it practical, right? So you can see 33% actually say must have BTO first before you propose. No house, cannot marry, right? And some people say you must propose first. 67% say propose first, then only buy house. But yeah, you must marry. So for all of those of you single ladies, single guys in Singapore, right? If you want to buy HDB, you have to fall in love first and find someone. Otherwise, you cannot buy HDB. Okay. If you don't get married, if you are fiancé and you don't get married, or for some reason you break up before the HDB is completed, you can forfeit the transaction. There are penalties, of course, and certain amount will be forfeited, but then you don't have to buy, right? Because you didn't get married, so you cannot fiancé, and then upon completion you still want to get key. Cannot. Government want to see that you're married. Okay, and the reason why government does this is government want to encourage people to start families and start having children. Okay, so next. You can also be if you're not married, you can be a family nucleus situation where, like I said, single mother and kids, right? They are also allowed to buy HDB, right? And of this scenario, they must be at least 1 Singapore citizen or 2 Singapore permanent residents. So just now, if the fiancé both Singaporean, no problem. One Singaporean, one citizen, one Singaporean, one PR, never mind. Or two PRs, right? If you are both Malaysian, both of you are PR, both of you get married, you can also buy a HDB, right? At least one must be a citizen. Or if I'm a citizen and my wife is a Malaysian, she's not a PR, can minimum one Singapore citizen or two PR in this equation, right? Then you say, wow, Ryan, jalat fuck lah, right? If okay, I can't say that, but Ryan F, right? I cannot buy HDB. What if I'm single? What if I don't want to get married? Then does it mean I cannot buy HDB, right? Is Singapore government depriving my rights as a citizen to buy a HDB? No. If you are not getting married, you can buy, but you must wait until you are 35 years old, right? And after 35 years old, then you qualify for the single scheme where you can buy a HDB. Okay, so basically you defer your entire HDB purchase for a long period until 35. So to buy a first property at 35 is actually you start pretty late, right? So, but yeah, that's the way it is, because government want to encourage family nucleus creation in Singapore. So the moment I finish this slide, I'm sure all of you property investors from Malaysia or other countries will say, wow, how to buy HDB like this? Yeah, actually you cannot, because HDB is not meant for investors. It's not meant for speculators, right? It's meant for people who want to have a roof over their head. Okay, so if you're an investor, or you for some reason you have property elsewhere that you cannot sell, you have a house elsewhere that you cannot sell, but you cannot buy HDB, you have to look at condo. Okay, but okay, other than that, other HDB regulation, of course, if you buy BTO, there is a income ceiling. You have to be a certain income ceiling range on the people who are buying, right? So depends on area. Right, mature estates, normally the income ceiling is lower. They want to encourage people to buy non-mature areas, right? Of course, resale, there is no income ceiling. If you are first-time home buyer and you are citizen or PR, you may be eligible for grants. Government does give you grants. There is something called a minimum occupation period, or in short called MOP. Now, what's an MOP? MOP is basically means after you get keys, you must stay in the HDB for 5 years. Okay, I repeat, after you get keys, you must stay in the HDB for 5 years. Before you sell or rent, you must stay in the HDB for 5 years. Okay, so if I'm a young newlywed couple, I buy a BTO because BTOs are cheaper, right? Then I wait 4 years for construction. I get the keys. After I get the keys, I must stay in the HDB for 5 years before I'm allowed to sell or rent. Okay, so that's what MOP is. They say, wow, Ryan, this is another big regulation. Yes, you can't take the HDB and then rent it out. You can't take the HDB off and flip it, sell to another person for a higher price. No, you must reside in that HDB for a 5-year period. Okay, before you're allowed to rent or sell. Because this HDB is not for speculation, it's for you to stay. Okay, I repeat. So, and for those of you who are not familiar with how this works, in Singapore, normally we don't call, in Malaysia, we call 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom condo, or 1-bedroom condo. Singapore HDB doesn't work like that. They work by number of rooms, including the living room. So when we say a 3-room flat, we're actually referring to 2 bedrooms plus 1 living hall. So a 3-room flat is technically a 2-bedroom. Okay, okay. And if you buy a HDB in Singapore, the down payment is only 10%. If you are taking a loan from HDB, HDB does provide a loan. So it's basically a government loan, right? So-called government bank. It's not a bank, right? But government loan, right? So you can get 90% financing. So, or if you take loan from bank, from a private bank like DBS or OCBC or UOB, then you can get 75% financing only, but a 25% down payment, right? And the good thing about taking HDB loan, of course, is you can get higher margin. But the problem is that HDB loan, normally the interest rate is a little bit higher because government is not a bank. So government, the rate is a bit higher if you take a HDB loan. But it does help you if you are short of cash for down payment. Okay, so actually buy a HDB in Singapore, first-time home buyer in Singapore, I think you're very lucky. Singaporeans are very lucky in the sense that government, this HDB system is very good. You don't see this kind of thing in other parts of the world where the government has taught very thoroughly how to help young people own houses, right? And this is their first house. And we're not talking about speculation, we're talking about a roof over your head. Okay, now, what's the next category, which is a private condo? Okay, so condos are for investors. If you're an investor, you talk about condo, right? It's very difficult to buy HDB based on the regulations earlier if you're talking about investment. Okay, but and of course, many people who own HDB after the MOP 5-year MOP period, they're thinking, hey, I want to upgrade, I want to enjoy a higher status, higher quality investable category property. I want to sell my HDB and move on, or if I have enough funds to save, I want to buy a condo. Right? How do I do it? So, and what is a condo like? So, a condo, of course, you can buy from developer, right? Or you can buy from the market, right? The good thing about condo is there is no MOP lah. You can buy a condo today, you can sell it next month, you can sell it 1 year later, okay, no problem. And you can rent out immediately, you can stay if you want, up to you. You can leave it empty, right? There is no restriction in the use of the condo, right? There's no MOP and there's no restriction in use, right? You can buy 10, you can buy 1, you can buy 5, you can buy 2 condos, you can buy 1 condo today, buy 1 condo next week, right? There are no restriction in that sense. Of course, there are cooling measures, we shall talk about it later, right? But condo is more freer regulation compared to HDB. Okay, and condo you can buy freehold. They are leasehold also 99 years, and they're also leasehold 999 years, right? And condo supply in Singapore is, I mean, I will say limited, but I mean, it's easier to quantify because majority of houses in Singapore are HDB, right? 80% of the homes in Singapore are actually HDB. So the balance 20% are condo and rental houses. So actually it's quite, they are not, the number of condos are quantifiable, right? And if you buy a condo in Singapore, right, the first time buyer, you have to put a 25% down payment with a bank financing maximum of 75%. Okay, so how about EC? Now, as I mentioned earlier, EC is a hybrid public-private property. So how does it work? Right? You can buy HDB, you buy EC like how you buy HDB, right? You can buy from the government, right? But for the first 5 years of the HDB's completion, that means after the HDB is completed, not during construction. For the first 5 years, the HDB has a 5-year MOP, just like EC. So if you buy an EC, right, from construction, from the government, or not from government, from the developer, right? Because it's built by a developer. HDBs are built by the government, but ECs, executive condominiums, are built by private developers, right? So the first 5 years there's a MOP, just like HDB. Okay, in years 6 to 10, right, you can rent out the EC or sell to citizen or PR only. Okay, so they relax it a bit. Okay, you can rent it out, or you can sell to citizen or permanent only, resident only. After 10 years, it sort of converts from HDB, it becomes like a fully private condominium. Okay, so when you see below, like when you buy a new EC, pretty much all the rules that apply to HDB applies. You have to be fiancé. There is an income ceiling, although it's higher, right? You cannot own any previous private property. You cannot own any previous HDB. Okay, so actually for a lot of people who are what we call a sandwich, you earn enough income where buying a HDB is you can do better than HDB, but you don't have enough income to buy a condo. So a lot of people actually buy EC as a first step. If your income is good enough, you buy EC, because after 10 years, you sort of automatically convert your EC into a private, and that's a good thing, right? You want to have the flexibility of a private condo, right? But after 10 years, so it's fine. So a lot of people are willing to make that trade-off, right? And the way EC is priced, they tend to be cheaper than most private condominiums. They're somewhere in between the HDB and the condominium. So this is always a highly recommended thing, right? If you are somewhat middle high income, right? But you don't want to buy HDB because HDB is very highly regulated, but you don't have enough money to buy condo, then you can buy an EC. And ECs are pretty much a condo because they are like private condominium facilities and all that. So EC is that sandwich category. Okay, so if you look at so Ryan, I understand what you mean so far. HDB, condo, EC. You have a high level understanding of what it is, but what is the price difference? So this chart, I think I took from SingSaver.com. Actually, it's a pretty good chart, right? I'm happy to quote them and reuse this piece of this table. And you can see here in this slide, roughly 2020. Of course, I think actually if you ask me, prices have gone up a little bit compared to this table in 2021, but it gives you a rough idea where prices are today. And you can see that BTO flats or HDB resale flats are generally a lot cheaper than condo. I would say about half price. A HDB is generally about half price. I mean, half is a very good gauge. Right? It could be cheaper, could be higher, but half like easy to talk, right? Half price compared to a condo, half or less, right? Compared to a condo. So you say, wow, really big difference. That's the way the market is, right? HDBs are generally a lot cheaper compared to condo. Do come back to the video later and see, and find out more from SingSaver if you feel that this is interesting, right? Yeah. So so as you can see from my video, and I think I've highlighted here in short what are the pros and cons. So HDB Pro is cheaper, right? If you just want to buy a house with a roof, HDB is what you go, but it's highly regulated. If you just so happen to be in a relationship with somebody, you're going to get married, you found your loved one, you're going to get married, then HDB is the place to go, right? Of course, it's not investable property, right? But many people do buy HDB, and after the MOP period, which is 5 years, right? I mean, there is a good chance that your HDB has appreciated in price. So a lot of people do buy the HDB, the BTO first, wait the 4 years construction, get the key, then wait 5 years MOP. Then by then, which is almost roughly 10 years, by the time you sell, your HDB should have appreciated. Like, there's no guarantee, of course, but in most cases, a lot of people do experience appreciation in the HDB price. So they sell the HDB and then they upgrade to a condo. So that's a fairly common route for homeowners in Singapore, right? Yeah, so I mean, HDB is not as bad as it looks, but you have to wait 10 years, more or less. I mean, five years MOP minimum, right? And you buy BTO to maximize your price appreciation because BTO is the cheapest because you buy new launch, right? And by the time you can clear MOP, it'll be 10 years. So yeah, so private residential, of course, is less regulated, freer, right? Comes with facilities and you can buy freehold, but they're of course a lot more expensive, right? And yeah, so that's basically it for today's video. In part 2, we're going to talk about things like BSD, ABSD, TDSR. We're going to do an example of how to purchase one private residential property, so you have some idea of the actual mathematics, actual numbers, and we'll talk about some latest trends in the Singapore property market. So I hope this video has been useful. Maybe a bit dry, but I hope useful. And you learn some basic things about how to get started in Singapore. I think the important thing you learn today is a HDB. What are some HDB rules like? Private condo and executive condominium, the EC. What are the differences and why these 3 categories are the most widely used categories for property purchases in Singapore, right? Thank you very much. If you have any interest, please contact me, Ryan Khoo, at the number below or our email. And we do have a very active Facebook group at Malaysian Investors in Singapore. Thank you very much.